Hi, Black Hollywood Live fans. Today on Justice is Served, we're talking about Bill Cosby's trial. Almost done now. We are just, hopefully, moments, hours, days away from a jury verdict, as are we in the case of the officer who killed Philando Castile. We've got a breaking news on Trump, and a Flint, Michigan official has been charged with involuntary manslaughter. It's a jam-packed day full of legal news. Stay with us here on Justice is Served.
You are tuned in to Black Hollywood Lives. Justice is served.
Hello and welcome to what I originally thought was a slow legal news day. I was like, oh man, if we had only gotten some verdicts in, this would be much more interesting. And then we've got some breaking news stories. So it's going to be an interesting, although for me a bit of a frustrating legal day of reporting. How are you, Yemi?
I'm doing good.
It is just down to 2 today. Welcome, please, my co-host, Yemi Abayomi, a fellow attorney who will help me dissect and analyze all the legal cases that we're covering this week. Starting off with the Bill Cosby trial. It felt like it started and went into the hands of the jury in a flash. And we kind of have skipped some of the details along the way on this show, at least, so I thought we would go back and kind of examine what we'd missed. I thought we were going to have like another opportunity. I don't know why I thought that this case was going to go on.
I think a lot of people thought the case was going to take a few weeks and not just a few days,
and
really.
Part of the reason why is because the defense rested after 6 minutes.
That actually, I had to read that twice. Like, wait, did you just do 6 minutes today, or was it
6 minutes total?
No, 6 minutes total. They put up one witness on the stand. I think a police officer who had interviewed Constand at the time that she reported the crime having taken place, or the alleged crime having taken place.
And pointed out some of inconsistencies in the dates and kind of things like that.
And I guess they felt that the prosecution simply hadn't proved their case, and why do we need to say more than we feel is necessary? So let's just point out those inconsistencies, introduce some doubt in the mind of the jurors in terms of her credibility, and hopefully, and hopefully send him home. Essentially, seems to be their strategy.
I can't wait to see how that turns out for him. He is facing 10 years in prison if he's convicted of this sexual assault.
Yeah, 3 counts of aggravated assault.
Yeah. This was interesting because I hadn't actually read what assault was what I knew, but assaulting her when she was unconscious and assaulting her using drugs to impair her ability to consent, and then also assaulting her without her consent. So those are the 3. Some of the interesting testimony along the way has been from the alleged victim herself, who, by all accounts, seemed to be firm and steady in her answering of the questions. And
it was a lot of testimony. She was on the stand for a total of 9 hours over the course of 2 days.
Yeah.
And so she had some breaks in between, and apparently during those breaks she was meditating and kind of trying to kind of calm. Yeah.
Good for her. Isn't that a great testimonial for meditation right there? Her mother also testified, and there was an expert in sexual assaults who had her credibility damaged a bit when the defense pointed out that she was perhaps biased because of a social media post that she made in reference to this case.
The expert was biased?
Yeah, Veronique Valliere was asked if she was biased because she posted a story, a post on Facebook, I believe, about the Cosby case with the caption, "Victory, the case goes on."
I mean, I don't know, any witness that a party puts on the stand, I assume, especially any expert witness, you already know that person is going to be, their testimony is going to lean a certain way. That's the whole reason why they've chosen that witness, much in the same way that, the other side is going to have their own witness that's going to lean another way. They're getting paid.
Yeah.
Maybe she has a history, with violence or sexual assault, but either way, to me, it doesn't make a difference if I feel that she's
biased. I just think that juries may not know that as much as we
juries might
do.
not know that that the potential witness might be biased.
Well, I don't think that they realize it's kind of standard practice that the prosecution is going to put on one that's biased towards them, and the defense is going to put on one.
I would hope they'd know that.
I don't know. I've not. When I had jury duty, I may think I was like 6 months ago by now, and people didn't even know what the heck they were doing there or who the defense or the prosecution was.
Maybe I overestimate.
I really lost faith in
the competence of the general public.
Yeah. And so that's why I'm not sure about that. Another interesting witness was Kelly Johnson, and she testified that she too was drugged and assaulted in 1996. And that was allowed in because prosecutors were allowed to show like a pattern of behavior.
Yeah, initially they had wanted to introduce, I think, 13 women to basically say that this is Bill Cosby's way of operating. You know, even this lady Johnson had a similar story as Andrea Constand, and so there were similarities there, and they wanted to do that basically 13 times, and the judge said, wait, that's...
One is enough.
Yeah, that's a little bit prejudicial, so we'll let this woman speak about how she was drugged and couldn't move and couldn't defend herself against Bill Cosby. And
yeah, there was a whole lot of talk about whether with Benadryl and Quaaludes, because they did also read the transcript from the 2005 or 6 deposition that he did in the civil suit in this case, where he admitted to giving women Quaaludes for sex.
So that portion of the deposition is actually kind of what reignited the state's desire to pursue these criminal charges, where he did admit to giving Quaaludes to women that he was interested in having sex with. He says that Quaaludes were the party drug of the 70s, and much in the same way that you would offer a woman a drink at a bar and during the 70s, like you would offer them some pills because it was known to kind of create a sort of a high and arouse people sexually, but it wasn't that he was giving it to them unbeknownst to them or in a sneaky manner.
Well, Andrea Constand testified that she believed she was taking an herbal pill, specifically told Cosby, I trust you, and then took the pills and then found herself unable to really move, woke up disheveled, was in and out during him touching her inappropriately. So I don't really buy his I gave her Benadryl or Quaaludes, but I always told them what it was, even though I had no medical reason to have the Quaaludes, and the doctor knew that, but now the doctor's dead, so he will never be prosecuted for that. And Benadryl, who knew Benadryl can knock you out so hard? I guess it's possible.
I think Benadryl, I've taken Benadryl, and when I wake up in the morning, even if I take it the night before, even when I wake up in the morning, sometimes I'm still groggy. And I mean, I'm taking the actual recommended amount. But apparently he gave her, and I don't know, it's not enough, I don't think, but he gave her apparently 1.5 times the recommended quote-unquote dosage that's listed on the bottle. So I don't know that that would actually knock a person out or make them
unable to move.
So that's a tough part of that part of the story.
So then on Monday afternoon, so it's been a couple of days now, the case went to the jury, and so far the jurors have asked 5 questions during deliberations. They asked the judge to repeat 2 different parts of Cosby's statements to authorities, asked the court to define the phrase "without her knowledge" in one of the charges, and asked to rehear testimony from a Canadian detective who interviewed Constand.
I mean,
and then today they asked to rehear Andrea Constand's testimony about the night of the alleged assault.
So I think that's going to be a big piece because, as we mentioned before, she had her statement that she had given to the police, which took place a year after the actual incident itself. And then, of course, she has the testimony that she gave here now, I think 12 or 13 years later. And one of the things that the defense really tried to highlight in this case are those inconsistencies. She initially said that the assault took place maybe like in March of 2004. And then she said, oh, no, actually, it was a little bit earlier. It was 2003. She first said that, the assault happened after dinner at a restaurant. And then she said, no, actually there was no restaurant involved. And then she also said it happened the first time that we were alone together in his home. And then she said, well, actually it turns out it was the third time that we were alone together in his home, but the first and second time he had made passes at me. He had put his hand on my thigh. He tried to unbutton my jeans. And it was only in the third instance that I took those pills and I was passed out. She also said that she had minimal communication with him subsequent to the alleged attack, whereas it came out later that she had many subsequent,
like 72 phone calls.
I think 53. Okay. Phone calls.
But her answer to that was, I still had my job at Temple University, and it's because of my role in my job is why I had to reach out to him.
Yeah, it was interesting to me, even because I read these things and I'm sitting here reading these inconsistencies and I'm saying, well, this to me as a juror, this would kind of shake my faith in her recollection and her credibility. But one of the interesting things that the prosecutors pointed out, they said, yes, she did call him 53 times, but if you notice, she was checking her voicemail each time. She says that he was leaving her voicemails and that she was simply returning his calls because she had to as a member of the Temple staff. And the prosecutors introduced evidence that she would check her voicemail, listen to the message, and it was only after she would check her voicemail that she would call Bill Cosby, which would suggest that she was responding to a phone call.
Yeah.
I still think
Another thing that seemed funny was that she asked Cosby for tickets to one of his shows, and that seemed bizarre. Mm-hmm. But she says that she hadn't told family members that this had happened. She told her mom, but she hadn't told family members, and so when they asked her for them, she went ahead and asked Cosby for them. How does that add up to you?
For me, again, as the average juror, I would say that this also harms her credibility, because I would say, a sexual assault victim, in my mind, I would be, and you use the word bizarre, to me it seems bizarre that she would then still be in touch with him on a regular basis or not. And I don't know what her role was at Temple that she needed to be talking to.
She ran, was it the basketball?
I know that she was
department?
affiliated with the basketball team. I don't know what her specific role was, such that she needed to be in constant contact with Bill Cosby specifically versus another member of the basketball staff or another member of the booster club. Or I didn't really understand why she needed to be the one to get in touch with him all the time. And especially if after that type of unwanted contact, maybe you just say, hey, I'm so busy focusing on my coaching duties. I mean, I don't want to second guess. I don't want to play Monday morning quarterback, but it did seem odd to me. And I do think it's odd to me that she would then go to his show. And I think there was a time where she said she was in his hotel room and he lied down on the bed and she said, oh my gosh, what am I doing here? And she left. But to me, it all seemed odd. But the prosecution actually brought on an expert to say that, her behavior isn't necessarily unusual for a sexual assault victim, that oftentimes a sexual assault victim, one, will feel uncomfortable reporting the event and therefore you have a delay. And secondly, they might not necessarily cut off contact because they just want to get back to a sense of normalcy.
Right.
And so they just continue kind of going on as though nothing happened, even though they maybe have that internal struggle. So while it might be bizarre to me, they at least put on testimony showing that, it's not exactly inconsistent with the experience of a sexual assault victim.
So do you have an idea of which way this will go?
The inconsistencies are a big red flag, and it's hard for me to say, proved beyond a reasonable doubt, where the alleged assault was reported a year later. Her memory was cloudy a year later, and then 13 years later, who knows how much more cloudy her memory was. So I don't.
You don't have a whole lot of faith that the jury's going to come back with a guilty verdict.
Yeah, and I think it kind of weighs in favor of Bill Cosby, the fact that it's taken this long, because I think if they were leaning towards convicting him, I think it probably would have happened sooner rather than later. I think the fact that it's going on for a little while means that there's some questions in the minds of the
which is
jurors.
why they've asked.
What was
questions.
interesting was that after the trial, the defense attorney apparently held up a letter from a Mrs. Jackson, who also worked in the Temple athletic department, who says that, and this letter wasn't introduced because the judge said it was hearsay, but the attorney for Cosby held up a letter saying that there was a Miss Jackson in the athletic department at Temple who said that Andrea Constand came to her and told her that she was never assaulted, and that but having something of that nature could lead to a good payout someday. She says that she doesn't know who this woman is and has denied it. And as I said, this letter wasn't introduced in court, but maybe just another.
I mean, that is the very definition of hearsay. Well, think of a better example.
Well, so in Pennsylvania, apparently hearsay can be allowed if it directly rebuts something that the witness has said. So there are some.
Well, there's a lot of exceptions to the hearsay rule, which we go deeply into law school, and which comes up actually in the next case. I think we're ready to move on to Philando Castile. So the reason why I say in the Philando Castile case, an exception to the hearsay rule comes up is because his last words, Philando Castile, just if you need to catch up, was the guy who was shot by an officer in Minnesota after he'd been pulled over for a broken taillight, and his girlfriend live streamed on Facebook the aftermath of the shooting and basically him dying. And his last statement was, "I wasn't reaching for it," referring to the gun. Normally a statement like that would be hearsay, an out-of-court statement asserted for the truth of the matter. But that one was
dying last words.
Dying
declaration.
Yes.
Good. I do remember stuff from law school.
Right. So then, only us, law geeks would be like, "Woo! I spotted an exception to the hearsay rule." Yes. Okay. I think that's the only sort of thing that made me giggle about this case. So the trial is for Geronimo Yanez. That is the police officer that shot and killed him. He's facing 20 years for manslaughter and also 5 years for each of 2 counts for discharging a firearm and endangering the lives of Philando Castile's girlfriend, Diamond Reynolds, and her 4-year-old daughter who was in the back seat. Of course, his defense was that classic,
I was in fear for my life.
Yes.
Of course.
I had no other choice.
Buzzwords.
I didn't want to shoot Mr. Castile. That wasn't my intention. I don't know how that's not your intention when you shoot 7 times.
Within a minute of even approaching the car.
Right.
So he had even just got to the car. And if you remember the background of the story, remember he was stopped the officer Inez says that he stopped Philando Castile for a broken taillight. There was a question as to whether that was pretext for stopping him, because remember there had been a robbery in the area about 2 miles away 4 days earlier by someone with dreadlocks. Well, black and with dreadlocks. That's actually the description, literally, just black and with dreadlocks. And he saw someone driving in a car with flared nostrils, and he then stopped the car because it had a broken taillight and, thought this was, allegedly thought this was the robbery suspect.
And go ahead.
Oh, no. So that was how that all started. And so then when he approached the car, maybe whether that was in his head, oh, this guy is a suspected armed robber, I need to be kind of a bit more
vigilant.
Yes, and aggressive in my stance. And so when he approached Philando Castile, it was within 1 minute of even stopping him that he shot 7 times. But what to me didn't really make sense is that when you have an individual that you stop in their car and they're telling you, "Officer, by the way, I must tell you, I'm armed." I mean, I think you have to worry more so about the suspects or the individuals who are acting a little bit shifty or giving you reason to think that something's wrong, or they're trying to avoid.
They're trying to hide something.
Yeah, they're trying to hide something. First, for an officer to have that reaction with somebody who's clearly being very upfront about, right. I have a gun. Yeah. I think you should know that, sir. And he used the language that we all tell people that get stopped, like, you use very kind and respectful language. Tell them, "Sir, keep your hands where they where the officers can see them. You see him with his girlfriend, a child in the back seat. To me, it was just a very overzealous, aggressive reaction where I wouldn't think an officer would have that reaction when the person that you're stopping is being so candid with you.
Right, that was bizarre. And then the defense, though, said that he was culpably negligent because he failed to tell the police officer that he had a permit to carry that gun, which makes absolutely zero sense at all, because that would play no role in whether the officer was in fear for his life. The fact that he had a permit for it in that moment, in those less than 60 seconds, I don't see how that would make a difference.
The defense said that...
The defense said Castile was culpably negligent, which means that he had a duty to say or do something and then violated that duty, which doesn't make sense here, because he volunteered that he possessed a gun without saying that he had a permit to carry it. Also, that he reached for it instead of keeping his hands visible, which is where that comment, wasn't reaching for it right before he died, is important. And also his girlfriend said he was reaching for the seatbelt to release that so he can get his wallet.
I really want and I think this is actually going to be released after the trial. I really want to hear the audio from the dash camera, because that video hasn't been released. We've obviously seen Diamond Reynolds, her Facebook Live feed footage of what happened after Philando Castile had been shot, but we've not seen the dash cam footage from the officer's dash cam, and that dash cam footage also has audio, so you can actually hear Philando Castile say, I have to let you know, sir, I have a weapon on me. And apparently, just from the transcripts that I've read, not transcripts of the audio, but articles that I read, they say that, within seconds, Officer Inez is firing his gun. And I want to hear, did he say, I think after he said, I have to let you know I have a weapon on me, the officer said, okay, don't reach for it. But didn't say anything about keep your hands where I can see them, or put your hands on the steering wheel.
Yeah, the defense also said that he was negligent because he was high on marijuana, which rendered him incapable of following Inez's order not to reach for it. Clearly, that guy doesn't understand marijuana. And secondly, he was... the testimony was that Yanez did not give instructions, and in fact they put on another officer who testified to the protocol of what you would do or what you should say when somebody tells you they have a gun, which is to ask, where is it, and then please keep your hands on the steering wheel. But neither of those directions were given by Officer Yanez.
Right, neither of those commands were given, and on top of that, he corroborated the fact that he didn't know where the gun was, or actually that was actually one of the, speaking of inconsistencies, as we discussed in the Cosby case, there were some inconsistencies in Officer Inez's testimony as well, where he initially said that he didn't know where the gun was, but then he did say, he did see him, he saw the barrel of the gun, and that's what caused him to shoot. And then later he said, well, actually, no, I just saw the slide of the gun. Then he at one point said that he didn't know where the gun was, but then at another instance he said, but he told him to take his hand off the gun, as if though he saw his hand on the gun. And then there were medics, I think, that testified that the gun fell out while he was on the medical board, or certain witnesses testified that the gun might have fallen out of his pocket when he was on the medical stretcher, which suggested that he never had removed the gun from his pocket in the first place. Right. So how could Officer Inez had seen the gun? So there were some inconsistencies there with respect to Officer Inez's testimony.
Yeah, there was the jurors have requested a transcript interview that a situation where Officer Inez says he did not see the gun, but the judge denied that request.
That was surprising to me. Didn't
make much sense to me either.
If he's testifying on the stand to one thing, I think it's only prudent for the jury to say, well, okay, what did he say to the detectives immediately after the event, when his memory and recollection was much clearer, versus what he's saying now, months later.
It is interesting, though, that the judge allowed the jurors to take the shorts that Philando Castile was wearing when he was shot. in a baggie, but they let them take the shorts. What do you think that was for?
I read that the prosecution was trying to argue that Philando Castile's trigger finger was grazed by a bullet, and they were suggesting, well, if he could not have had his hands on the gun if there's a graze on his finger, but there's no gunshot, no holes in his pants, so his hands must not have been near his shorts or the gun at the time that he was shot.
Oh,
so I think that was the
interesting.
prosecution's way of thinking about that.
So we're waiting, but we have an idea about what the jury is thinking, because the jury has gone to the judge to say that they're deadlocked. The judge then asked them...
Is this breaking news? Because I'm like, I wasn't... Okay.
Yeah. The judge then asked them to continue trying to reach a verdict. Here's the quote from the judge: "You should decide the case for yourself, but only after you've discussed this case with your fellow jurors and have carefully considered their views. You should not hesitate to re-examine your views and change your opinion if you become convinced they are erroneous, but you should not surrender your honest opinions simply because other jurors disagree or merely to reach a verdict."
Okay, so he's kind of just telling them to go back in there and hash it out some more, basically, is what it sounds like.
I mean, I would rather, a deadlock than a not guilty verdict. And I think that there was a piece of evidence that was allowed in, but the prosecutors tried to use it during cross-examination rather than during their case, and the judge didn't allow them to use it that way, so it kind of handicapped them.
Do we know what this evidence was?
I think it was the interview of that interview where he said he didn't see the
detectives.
gun.
Okay.
An interview where he said that he didn't see the gun. Mm-hmm. And so if the jury deadlocks, then they can say, okay, that was a mistake that we made in this trial, and we can correct that in the next one. So we'll see. But I'm not now very hopeful for a conviction here.
Yeah, again, I think in this case, the longer that it takes to reach a verdict, I think the more likely it is that he's not going to be convicted, or at least he's not going to be found guilty.
Yeah, I don't remember how many times I've heard a jury tell a judge, we're deadlocked. The judge says, go try more, and then they actually come back with something. I don't think that happens very often.
We'll see. We'll find out.
All right, and some happier news for some kids suing Donald Trump and the administration over the climate. There are 21 young plaintiffs in this case, referred to as Juliana versus United States. They're arguing that their constitutional and public trust rights are being violated by the government's creation of climate danger. So it was, oh, that's so cute. Kids are getting involved in filing, a lawsuit. Good for them. Kids being, engaged in the legal system and doing what they can as activists. And I think most people are like, whatever, this is going to be just a waste of time. But it turns out that it's not a waste of time after all. Although the Trump administration has tried to end this case, the companies that are being sued have tried to get themselves extracted from the case. None of that has worked, and a judge recently said that the case is headed to trial. I was kind of shocked by that.
Well, I think... I don't know that I'm necessarily shocked by it. I think that the judge basically said that there's no basis for me to dismiss this.
Yeah.
We can go forth and see whether there's something to these claims, and if you feel like some procedural matter was off, you appeal.
Yeah.
That's fine. But there's no kind of extenuating circumstance that requires me to say, we've got to cut this off now.
Well, I thought that they may not have true standing or be able to state a real claim. This is for injury in the future because the planet won't be safe enough for you to live in. Is not a explicit crime that I know of. So
maybe based on scientific research demonstrating that climate change is happening. Here are the effects of, the release of fossil fuels or the release of
CO2,
of greenhouse gases, things. I mean, it's going to have an actual effect on the future, and I don't want to have to wait for that injury to take place, because by then it will be too late.
So basically, the judge says that there is sufficient complaint, standing, everything to actually test out the merits of this case. So go kids.
Yeah. And I just wanted to point out, because I thought it was interesting, because how the Trump administration has been acting very aggressively in getting this out of the courts. But this claim was actually filed during the Obama administration in November of 2016. So the Trump administration has now inherited it, and now they're just trying to do whatever they can to kick it out.
Okay, and then one of the more breaking news stories to me that I just saw was that 5 more officials in Flint, Michigan have been charged. The most serious of which is for the head of the state's Health and Human Services Department. His name is Nick Lyon. He has been charged with involuntary manslaughter. This was just yesterday. And misconduct in office, both felonies. This is the first time that investigators are drawing a direct link between what the government did or actually failed to do and people dying because of that. I can't remember another time when somebody was charged with involuntary manslaughter. I mean, police officers who shoot people hardly get charged with involuntary manslaughter.
Yeah, I mean, I tend not to get super excited about charges anymore, because those charges so rarely ever end up in any actual culpability being found. And what's interesting in this case is that, so in those cases where we see a government official being charged, it's usually because they did something, i.e. they shot a firearm, they killed someone who was unarmed. In this case, I thought it was interesting because this is kind of an act of omission, that the head of the Department of Health and Human Services basically was briefed about the fact that the contaminated water could potentially lead to Legionnaire's disease, but he took no action once he was briefed on that subject matter. And then subsequently in Flint, of course, we had some individuals dying from Legionnaire's disease. And so this is really a case of what was your duty to act, or did you have a duty to act, and did you act? And in this case, they didn't do anything. And so as an act of omission, he's being charged with involuntary manslaughter, which was really interesting to me.
Willfully disregarded the deadly nature of what he has been warned about. He faces up to 20 years in prison. Also charged yesterday was Eden Wells, the chief medical executive for the Michigan Department of Health and Human Services. She was charged with obstruction of justice and lying to a police officer, or a peace officer. And so now we're up to 15 people who've been charged in connection with the Flint water crisis. And the investigation's not over. I hope, seriously, that the investigation will go all the way up to the governor, Rick Snyder, and the investigators have tried to question him, but haven't been successful in being able to do so. You're like, good luck with that, Chelsea.
I feel so bad, but I just feel like there's so rarely any culpability for government officials. Even if they're, and oftentimes, people will say, oh, well, there's no criminal liability, even if, though, as an ethical or a moral matter, maybe they fell short. And that's kind of where everything kind of just lies and falls, and nothing really happens. And government officials aren't given the impetus to make a change in how they're running their people and their departments. Yeah. There's no incentive because they're not seeing the hammer really come down on anybody, not even really seeing a slap on the wrist.
Yeah, so I don't have all that much hope that Snyder will be included in this, but I would really like that. It would totally make my day. I would feel like justice is at least partially served. But I want.
I know we so rarely get to say that. I feel like when we're talking about these things. I know. One of these days.
And this one, you seem to say that justice was served here. We're talking about now the Montana Republican candidate for Congress who assaulted a reporter the night before the election. won the election, many people say, because the early voting had already occurred, and so people didn't know that this soon-to-be congressman was capable of assaulting a reporter for asking a question that was apparently a pretty standard question. So he was charged with assault and then was sentenced Monday. This is Greg Gianforte. He was sentenced to 40 hours of community service. So if he does it as a full-time job, that's 1 week, plus 20 hours of anger management classes. He also has to pay $385 in court fees and fines. He has to pay restitution to the reporter, Mr. Jacobs, in the amount of $4,464.97 because of his emergency room bill, broken glasses, and a couple of other things. And this is interesting, a promise here. The now congressman has promised to donate $50,000 to the Committee to Protect Journalists, an advocacy group for press freedoms and journalistic rights. You're laughing because you don't think that he's ever going to do that, or because he even tried to cover by offering this money?
Tried to cover. I don't think. So is that self-imposed?
Yeah.
Okay. I think that's nice as a PR move. I don't know. I don't have very, very strong feelings about this case. This case, it kind of makes me laugh just because it's so absurd. I think even in the first instance, someone asks you a question and you body slam someone. How old are you? What, rinky-dink random town did you grow up in where this is how you just, go to fisticuffs when someone says something you don't like? And body, the whole thing is just, it's laughable to me.
So you want to ask, who does that? And apparently who does that is a congressman. This is more than a legal injustice because, frankly, the sentence was pretty standard for, a first-time assault case. But just the example that sets to kids and the American public just is awful.
Yeah, but it just reinforces the fact that there's so many crazies. There's just crazies out there, and I think a lot of these political figures that we think have it together and are super buttoned up. And during the whole Trump campaign, how everyone kept mentioning the term presidential. You don't act presidential. You don't act like a politician the way that these politicians present themselves to the public. But in the reality of the situation, many of them, I shouldn't say many, some certainly, are not as polished as we might think. Mm-hmm. Or maybe they have certain triggers. Who knows? Maybe that will come out in his anger management class.
Yeah, that would, hope he does that. If he doesn't do the anger management or falls short on the community service hours, he has a deferred sentence, so, maybe he would see jail if he didn't complete those. But really, in all likelihood, he'll complete it, and it's 6 months. This will be expunged like it never happened.
And I want to know what his community service has to be.
There was a list of pre-approved nonprofits, including the Lions Club, an animal shelter, and the local fairgrounds.
Okay, like cleaning up the local fair. I feel like it should be something, because if he's just going into an office and what was the second one? What did you
Animal shelter.
Yeah, if he's just going into an animal shelter and playing with puppies all day, to me that's not really. I don't know if that's going to have the deterrent factor. But if he's being forced to clean trash on the side of the road and wear a sign, then I think that's something that's more.
Yeah, we should have that. You have to wear a sign saying why you have to do community service. If you're a congressman and you assault somebody, that's a new.
Although I think that would make sense, but I know some people consider that shaming, and I'm not so much against that.
I don't think that's cruel and unusual.
I don't either, but I've heard people, how when parents get mad at their kids and they make them wear a sign saying, "I will not lie to dad again," or something like that.
Apparently that doesn't work so well.
I've seen people kind of say that, "Oh, you're shaming the kid, you're embarrassing them, you're a bad parent." So who knows? Maybe that's just in the case of children.
Right. Maybe it does work on adults.
I just hope the community service is something has some substance behind it.
Or I would love for him to say, I couldn't do it. I was in Congress. I was in D.C. I couldn't do it. And then he goes to jail. That's what I would like. But he has until November 28th to get the community service done. So
it's a lot of time. 5 months or so, right?
Yeah. All right. And then finally, this news is just breaking like maybe hours ago, the Washington Post is reporting that the special prosecutor, Robert Mueller, has officially put Trump under investigation for obstruction of justice. We here talked about whether we thought that the elements of obstruction of justice were met after Comey's testimony, but now we're getting word that there is an actual... Well, I mean, we knew that there was an investigation into possible Russian collusion, but as for the obstruction of justice part, that has not been confirmed, but the Washington Post is reporting that. I don't want him to go down just for obstruction of justice. I want them to take their time and look at everything. I feel like obstruction of justice is like the low-hanging fruit at this point. Like, I want to know more.
See how involved he was. Like, how involved was he in terms of the Russian, if at all, in terms of the contacts with the Russian and the Russians, and then if he was actually involved, is that like a reason for his wanting Comey to,
or Flynn, or any of those characters?
Well, hopefully those are the things that are going to come out with the special prosecutor and the investigation.
Yeah,
that takes
I just
place.
hope he doesn't get like too narrowly focused on this obstruction of justice and sort of glosses over everyone else and everything else.
Oh, I would hope not. My hope would be that you're doing a really broad, in-depth investigation of all of the circumstances, starting with the campaign and any contacts with Russia, and moving on to what happened after the information about Russian hacking coming to light, and are you trying to slow down this investigation or not? And hopefully, we'll see more. Comey's testimony was obviously very interesting, and I'm sure it was what led to.
Did you hear
this.
any of Jeff Sessions' testimony?
I haven't heard
yesterday?
Jeff Sessions' testimony.
It's annoying testimony, because there was a whole lot of I don't remember, which he used way too much to leave himself much credibility. I mean, I know that we lawyers tell our clients to say that if you don't know the exact answer to the question, but he said it about things that he very well should have known, and if he doesn't know, probably shouldn't be the lead law enforcement officer in the entire country. And he refused to answer questions because there may be some privilege. And executive privilege is for the president to assert. The president hadn't done that. And he just chose not to answer questions. And Kamala Harris, our senator here in California, was like, you are the top law enforcement officer, and you can't say which privilege or right that you're asserting, or policy or anything. He's like, no, this is just, historically, people don't disclose what they discuss with the president. What? Okay. But he did say some things that backed up Comey's testimony, that Comey had said he was uncomfortable being left alone with Trump and things like that. So I think all in all, it bolstered Comey's story, and the obstruction of justice charge in my mind. But I know that when even after the Comey testimony, I flipped over to Fox News to see how is this side twisting it? Oh my God, they lie to people so badly.
What did
so
they
badly.
say?
It was Hannity that I was watching. He was like, ask any lawyer. This was not obstruction of justice. Something, ask any lawyer. And I was like, I'm one, and I don't agree with you. So haven't you just proven yourself to be completely incompetent to make a claim? Like, ask any lawyer.
But a lot
something is so obvious.
The main kind of crux of this obstruction of justice charge is whether, when Trump says, "Hey, I hope you I hope you just let this thing go," is he issuing a directive to Comey, or is he just stating how he feels and asserting his opinion? And what's relevant? Is it Comey's interpretation as to whether that was a direction?
Well, Kamala Harris asked a question that got exactly to that point when she says, you and I have both been prosecutors, and isn't it true that if somebody has, let's say, a gun to somebody's head and they say, I hope you give me your money, that can still be a directive even if the words I hope are used? To which he said yes. So when a man who's your superior can fire you, is the president of the United States, says, I hope you can see your way clear to letting this go, it's reasonable to take that as an order.
As I feel like with everything, and I don't know if I'm just becoming the biggest skeptic these days, I just feel like the investigation, the word is going to be, it was concerning. It's not going to be that, you know, something illegal took place. It's something concerning took place, or maybe ethically, or something inappropriate. Not even ethics. I don't even know if ethics is going to come into it. But I think the words are going to be inappropriate, and the words are going to be concerning, but in terms of...
but not obstructing.
No.
And then, which I'm not going to agree with. And then the other thing that I found funny that Hannity was talking about was like, actually, Comey just admitted himself to a felony. The felony of failing to report another felony. That if Comey was so sure that obstruction of justice had been committed and he didn't report it, then he was guilty of a felony himself. And they like had up there like the language of the law. But Comey said, I don't know if this amounts to obstruction of justice. I'm leaving that to the special prosecutor. So he doesn't know altogether. And then he was going to report it after he was fired, because the firing may very well been the biggest example of obstruction of justice, not even saying, hey, why don't you let this Flint thing go? So anyways, I thought it was really fascinating, but I hope that we keep going deeper.
I think the public wants it to go deeper and really see what really happened, what happened with our elections, what happened with our choice, our democracy, and how involved was the president in terms of wanting to make sure that we have continued, you know, autonomy in our elections.
And speaking of, Jeff Sessions admitted yesterday that this Russian interference is a big frickin' deal. He was pretty emphatic about it. He agreed heavily with John McCain, who was asking him, is this not a serious matter? Oh, yes, this is very serious. And then he was asked by somebody else, well, did you ever have a meeting about it with anybody? And he was like, no. So, odd. Yeah. Odd. All right. Well, I think that's our daily dose of attempted justice is served. But I think that's where we are. We're in attempted. Hopefully next week we'll be able to bring you the verdicts in both the Cosby case and the Philando Castile case. I think the Cosby case may come out Friday because those jurors are sequestered. And they probably want to go home for the weekend. So we'll see if we have any luck with that. Thank you, Yemi, for your insight. And join us next week for another episode of Justice is Served. Thanks, everyone.
From executives Keven Undergaro, Dario Kristen, Tiana Hobson, and the entire BHL staff, we would like to thank you for supporting Black Hollywood Live, the first online broadcast network dedicated to African American entertainment. For questions and comments, contact us. info@blackhollywoodlive.com. Like us on Facebook, tweet us, or Instagram us at BHL Online. And I am the official voice of Black Hollywood Live, Scipio. Instagram me at KingXOBay. Thanks for tuning in.
Hollywood Redefined.
The views expressed here are those of the host only and do not necessarily reflect the views of BHL or its owners or principals.